one of the things that's a big feature of a day like this is to talk about developments, and the previous forums have been quite a lot about what we're planning to do and what we're hoping to deliver, and we're actually in a position to be able to deliver some very significant developments. But we also want to talk about the things that are in the pipeline. So if we look at a development in terms of providing better support because people have felt that they couldn't get access, a big thing that we've done is introduce these extension officers that Graham's just introduced Annie and Max to you on. Another thing we're doing is, this one's not, I'm sorry, I'm just not coordinating myself. One of these is showing me what's up there and one of them is showing me the next slide. I'm on to it now. The next thing is the SIL Industry Advisory Group. And in the back of the booklet we've got a list of some current members. We're still looking for a farmer as a non-breeder representative for the North Island group because we're wanting to get sort of ram buyers' view as well as the ram breeders' view about what genetic information is useful and how we can better get it out there and being used in industry. So you'll see here that that's on page 24 of your booklet. We've got these industry standard indexes which we introduced last year, which we're now going to begin to promote. And with the revisions that Cheryl Newman's going to talk about a bit later with our new national evaluation where we can include all active SIL flocks in that one evaluation, we're going to combine the release of that with starting to rate animals on these indexes for those sire leader lists that we publish on a website. So you'll be receiving some information in an upcoming newspaper where our plan is to have the SIL ACE will no longer be a separate evaluation, it will now be a reporting system on the national evaluation which we do regularly on SIL. And we plan to have it as an opt-out system. So everyone will be in unless they tell us they don't want to be in that reporting system. And we won't change it overnight. In the interim, we'll keep producing the SIL ACE lists on a 2-monthly basis using the flocks that are currently opted in, but we will change that in the next 6 months or so. We've done a major revision of lamb survival, which some people may have noticed has reduced the tail ends. We had some extremely high and extremely low ratings for lamb survival, and a major revision has gone through there to get what we think is unusual and extreme data out of the analysis. So if you've got a series of sires in a particular birth year with a decent number of progeny and they're averaging about 85% survival and they range from 75 up to 92, we're excluding the 98% survivals with 150 progeny and the 60% survival with 150 progeny, because we say that doesn't fit the pattern of data we're seeing for the rest of the birth cohort. If you want more detail on that, we'll give you some more information in an upcoming newsletter, but feel free to ask one of us about that. Near release is this thing that Cheryl's going to talk about, the genetic engine upgrade, and the big thing we were aiming at here was bigger data sets and faster analysis. But as a part of that, we also want to address a niggling gripe that we've had that's been a significant problem for a number of breeders, and that's where animals that are brought in from outside without pedigree get a starting breeding value back in the 1995 base year. And Cheryl is going to be presenting information about how we've addressed that in a second talk that she's giving this morning. Not all in one talk, she's got a bit of a spell while I think Tim's talking about some index work. We're going to have to change the way our report writer works, because if we're doing a huge analysis of all SIL, it potentially can report breeding values on a cross-flock report where flocks are not connected at all, and so the BVs, strictly speaking, aren't valid to compare. So we're going to be revising the way the report writer works and developing rules on that basis so that it'll be easier to flag which BVs on a cross-flock report are valid to compare and which aren't. And Cheryl, again, is going to be presenting a few ideas about that as one of her talks. You'll have received in the email, and if you haven't, put your hand up so that we can get your name or come and see one of us, this booklet about best practice. And this is not the best practice booklet. This is our draft idea, and we've taken some key traits like reproduction, growth and survival, and just illustrated the sort of way we want to present this as a best practice system. This will drive how we collect data in our progeny test flocks, but we also think it's our yardstick that you can judge your own operation by as to what's best practice. We want your feedback. If we've got it wrong, or we're being too pedantic, or we're not being pedantic enough, give us your feedback. We welcome that. The whole purpose of this draft document is to gain feedback from you. And another thing that we've got to do is update our indexes for these new traits that were introduced last year, body condition score and stayability, because a number of you have been crying out for an economic weighting, so you can pull that in and say, how much is that worth to me relative to the other traits? So under development, we've got a next stage of the genetic engine upgrade, and that's where we integrate the DNA with the pedigree and performance data into one analysis. Currently for the DNA breeding values, we estimate them separately to the estimated breeding values that are based on pedigree and performance, and then we blend them. A much more efficient way is to have one analysis. That's quite a significant step, and it's requiring a fair bit of work because it's right at the leading edge of genetic evaluation research internationally. And our researchers are working on that and keeping in touch with those other international researchers. In order for that to work, we have to have a major development change to our database. Our database so far has been about performance, pedigree, and storing breeding values. Once you add in the genotype data, the results of those DNA tests, the size of the database goes up by factors of 100 or 1,000 or more. So we've had to do a fairly major development there so that when we do get an automated system with DNA, it's fairly simple and a lot of the procedures occur automatically. At the moment, it's very unwieldy to manually transfer data files and work with them like that. So that's a major development. From your point of view, it's under the hood and it doesn't look like much, but it's equivalent of buying a Ford Falcon with a Morris Minor motor in it, and if you put a V8 in it, you'll suddenly notice there's a performance difference. The meat yield revision is something that I'll be talking about this afternoon. We're still collecting data. We haven't got to the next stage, but what we want is feedback from you about how we're going to characterise good carcasses. And the point from your point of view is you assess that in live animals to say this is going to be a good one for breeding a carcass animal. We want your views on what you're assessing in a live animal to help us calibrate what we're trying to do with working with the meat companies to say what is the good carcass to link those up. So your feedback is very welcome on that. The major development in the index area is some very significant work that Abacus Bio have done that's going to be presented by Tim Byrne. And that's what I call next generation indexes. These are the indexes that are addressing the problem that some of you are facing where you say, I've got that trait to where I want it, I don't want it to change. And are there other ways that I can treat that trait in an index so that we can hold it in a particular place? And there's some challenges there, and Tim's going to be presenting the results of the work that they've done in that area. They're not implemented in SIL yet, but based on the feedback you're giving us, will give us a strong steer as to whether that gets fast-tracked and put into SIL indexes. The CPT revision and the getting away from 7 sites that have got what I call a more research focus to having a couple of those and some more industry-focused sites, what we call next generation sites, has begun, and there'll be a talk and discussion about that tomorrow. So there's lots of developments happening. And finally, a number of you in the room I know have been saying to me, when's the CPT booklet coming out, or the replacement that you promised last year? I promised it. It's not here, but I made an absolute commitment it'll be here before I go. And this is going to be our sort of state of sheep genetics that can be updated on an annual or another frequency basis. And we think it'll be more useful both for you, for benchmarking yourselves, and for industry benchmarking when they're buying rams, saying, you know, how do these rams feature relative to industry? So things we've got planned, we'd like to upgrade the Flock Finder app that some of you know of, so that you've got some of you recording traits which that app currently doesn't tell anyone that you're recording, and they're saying we need to have that in there. The idea is to report something about genetic merit in the flock. And so rather than you looking at flock averages, we're now thinking maybe the best thing to do is to characterise your flock on the variation there relative to the variation in industry, so people can get a feel for the variation you've got there. And that enables you to market your animals, saying we've got very tight variation for this particular trait, or we've got animals that will suit both this sort of country and this sort of country based on this sort of information. We'll be sending out some ideas about that in a newsletter. We've got a request quite often from ram buyers that they should be able to look up your genetic trends on some sort of online thing or an app. I'd like your feedback about that. That's why there's a question mark just there. We want to rebuild the Ram Finder app. Usage has been going up each year, but usage isn't as great as we want. What we want to know is how we can make it better use for both. We think that's primarily a ram breeder tool, where you're looking for a specific ram with different combinations of merit. If you've got definite views on that, please come and let us know. And the thing I talked about earlier about getting the report writer to handle connectedness, at the moment, the report writer doesn't do anything about connectedness, and if you're not careful, you can get a report which has information on size from different flocks that are genetically unconnected that invite comparison when the comparisons, strictly speaking, are not valid. A 3 kilogram weaning weight BV in one flock may not be equivalent to a 3 kilogram weaning weight BV in another flock, because we've got no genetic benchmark to adjust them relative to each other. So we need to build that in so there's some flag on a report. The strict view, which Cheryl's going to tell you about, is you don't report them if they're not connected. Another one is you put some sort of mark against them, but Cheryl's going to talk about that in more detail. The other thing we need to do if we're doing regular analyses on a very large scale, we have to do some data quality control and audits of them, rather than just generating the analysis and leaving it to you. At the moment, Sharon McIntyre and Cheryl Newman do a lot of checking of the SIL ACE results when they come out every 2 months to make sure there aren't any significant changes from the previous analysis that are going to surprise us. So we need to automate that, because if we're going to do these things on a weekly basis, we won't want to discover 3 weeks later, after a lot of effort, that there was something there we should have found sooner. So this is part of us giving you better information, faster and more frequently. The final one, and this is a plea from my colleagues in Abacus, is that we long overdue a look at the economic weightings in our indexes, and in particular, this is part of addressing this issue of feed costs and the ewe size penalty. And so we need to look at that and consider what ways we can look at that better. I think the body condition score issue is part of that. And so you'll hear a bit more about that from Max when he gives his seminar talk this afternoon. So, ram buying tools. What we need to do is say, what tools can we help a ram buyer make efficient use of the information you've got? We think that there might be ways of using some of the smart technology, like a tablet, so that they can have information which inside the tablet is all of the rams you've got on sale. And then you wand animals and just their information appears on the screen for just the breeding values that particular ram buyer wants. So these are sort of ideas that are going around in our head. We're trying to work out how to make the ram buying process more efficient for both you and the buyer, or you and the breeder if you're a buyer. I know there's a few buyers, not breeders here. So the meat yield revision, which we're talking about, a major focus on that is bringing in shape. People, some breeders in this room have made a very strong point to me that some highly rated animals on our meat yield index have a good lean percentage because they're very muscular, like the animal on the left there, and others are just skinny, like the animal behind this microphone. So the point being, you can have a lean percentage for very different reasons. You can be skinny or you can be muscular. If you're just measuring lean percentage, they both have a high lean percentage. So that's one thing we're wanting to address there. What we call muscularity. Another one is, and I was heartened by what we think is interest in this intramuscular fat percentage by Sharon McIntyre, who was at a conference in Australia last week, and she said the Australians have highlighted a problem they've got with selecting for leanness and muscle eating quality going down. We must not go there if we can, and if it's to do with breeding more intramuscular fat or marbling fat in while trying to keep other levels of carcass fat low, we need to be starting to work on that as soon as possible. And there's a talk later this morning about ways we can measure intramuscular fat. The key thing about the meat yield revision is we have to align it with commercial carcass assessment systems. So we can talk about that in a theoretical science point of view. We have to be doing this in a way that works with the meat industry. And we've got engagement with a number of meat companies, and we're wanting to take that to the next step in the near future. So the final slide I've got here is about body condition score stability. It's not actually, it's about muscularity in this afternoon's workshop. And the whole point of this slide is we want to know which bits of the animal are you assessing when you say this animal's a muscular, good carcassed animal versus not. And I've just put the skeleton up there because those are good reference points for what it is when you're looking at the live animal or putting your hands across the live animal. So thank you, and you're going to get lots of information in the upcoming talks. I've just done a quick skirt over what's coming.